Campaign 2018 coverage continues now with an Ohio Senate race. Incumbent Democrat Senator Sherrod Brown, running for a third term, debates Republican Congressman Jim Renacci, with Senator Brown leading by 16 points in the latest RealClearPolitics polling average, and the Cook Political Report rating the race as likely Democrat. This is the first of 3 debates planned. The next is scheduled for Saturday, with the final one taking place on October 26th. Tonight's debate is in Cleveland and should be starting shortly.
And good evening from the Westfield Studio Theater in the Idea Center at Playhouse Square in Cleveland. I'm Russ Mitchell, anchor and managing editor at WKYC TV here in Cleveland.
And I'm Ann Fisher, host and executive producer of All Sides with Ann Fisher at WOSU Public Media in Columbus. Welcome to the first Senate debate presented by the Ohio Debate Commission, a coalition of news organizations, universities, and civic groups that came together this year to encourage better debates for better elections.
We welcome those watching and listening throughout the state on television, radio, and live streaming, and of course those here in our studio audience.
The audience here has agreed to remain silent so that we can focus on what the candidates are saying. However, we welcome you to applaud at this moment as we welcome our candidates, incumbent Democratic Senator Sherrod Brown and his Republican challenger, Congressman Jim Renacci.
Gentlemen, good evening to you both. The Ohio Debate Commission drafted tonight's format, and these rules have been agreed to by both candidates. Our debate it will be 60 minutes long. Both candidates will have 30 seconds for their opening statements, and then we'll begin with our questions. A coin toss determined that Senator Sherrod Brown will make the first opening statement. He'll take the first question as well. He'll then have 90 seconds to respond, and Congressman Jim Renacci will answer the same question for 90 seconds. Senator Brown will then have 30 seconds for rebuttal. There will be no candidate-to-candidate questions allowed this evening. Candidates will each have 90 seconds for a closing statement.
And with that, let's begin. Senator Brown, you have 30 seconds for your opening statement.
Ms. Fisher, thank you. Mr. Mitchell, thank you for continuing this proud tradition of Ohio debates on all kinds of political offices and campaigns. I start by recognizing my wife, Connie Schultz, in the audience, and our daughters, left to right, Emily, Elizabeth, and Caitlin. I'm honored that they're here, and always thank my wife for her support and being who she is in my life. So I look forward to this debate. I look forward to debating Congressman Renacci. Thank you again for hosting it.
Thank you, Senator Brown. Congressman Renacci, you have 30 seconds for your opening statement.
Well, I want to thank the Debate Commission for sponsoring this event. I want to thank my wife Tina and my family for being here. And I want to thank the Senator for being here as well. Look, tonight you're going to hear about 2 visions for Ohio from 2 very different people. My vision is for Ohio first. My vision is to make sure we're growing our economy and continue to grow our economy. The Senator's vision is of Washington first, creating one job for himself and actually loving Washington and Chuck Schumer so much that he's forgotten about the people of Ohio.
And with that, let's begin. Senator Brown, first question for you this evening. Of course, tonight we're in Cleveland, a city on the rise, as you know, with wonderful things happening and some of the best people you'll meet in the world. But it is also a city with a crime problem. As we speak tonight, there have been 100 murders in this city this year, the 5th year in a row. We've crossed that mark. Senator Brown, what can you do better to help this city and others across the state become safer places to live and work?
Connie and I live in this city. We live in southeast part of Cleveland. We love this city. We see the city of Cleveland making a comeback. We also, though, know we have a state government that has pulled money out of our city, has not invested in our streets and highways, has not invested in our police. One of the reasons and police and fire, one of the reasons the Fraternal Order of Police have endorsed me is because of my support for law enforcement, also my support for going after the root causes of crime. We know that in this city, not far from our neighborhood, in fact, the zip code we live in, 44105, had more foreclosures in the year 2007 than any zip code in the United States of America, in large part because of Wall Street greed and what happened in housing and what happened 10 years ago to our economy. We need to invest in good jobs. We need to invest in our cities. We need to invest in infrastructure. I worked on a plan with 4 other senators to fulfill the president's promise, which he has not really introduced yet, for $1 trillion in infrastructure spending over 10 years, paid for by closing tax breaks, and that would help our police and fire and public schools and help in this housing crisis. 1/4 of people in this country who rent, 1/4 of people who rent in this country spend half their money, half their income on housing. That means one thing goes bad in their lives, and their lives turn upside down. This federal government has paid little attention to housing. State governments paid little attention to housing. That's where we need to invest, in housing and what else we do.
Thank you very much. Congressman Renacci.
Well, thank you. And again, my heart goes out to the people here in Cleveland and some of the issues that we have. And I've said that all along. I made my home Ohio many, many years ago, 35 plus years ago. And it's because I love this state and I love what's going on here. But I do think we need to look closer at our cities. And it's one of the things I've done. As United States Congressman, we set up an organization called Opportunity Cleveland. That's the difference between someone who talks and someone who gets things done. We put a group together who actually started looking at the inner city and looking at opportunities for mentorships, for jobs. The best way to be able to change this city is to be able to make sure that our children and grandchildren, our young adults, have those opportunities. They have their opportunities to see mentors just like I did when I was growing up. I came from a very poor family, poor situation as well, but I also had mentors throughout my life and opportunities to see jobs. Whether it was working on a car, whether it was working on a road crew, I had mentors along the way that was able to guide my life. And those are the kind of things we need here in Cleveland. And that's why I was so proud to start the Opportunity Cleveland group, to be able to put people together and match up young adults with opportunities for mentors, match up young adults with opportunities for seeing jobs and seeing opportunities. That's the opportunity. But the difference is I'm here. I'm out here. I come back and I get involved with the community. The difference between me and my opponent, Sherrod Brown, is he loves Washington so much, and Chuck Schumer, he's forgotten about Ohio. He's been there for 25 years.
Congressman, thank you. Senator Brown, a 30-second rebuttal.
Talk about what I've done the last 4 or 5 days. A week ago, my office hosted 500 women in Cincinnati in our 4th annual women's conference, women engaging in the community to help this community. Just this past weekend, 600 students from 35 schools, university students from 75 schools around Ohio came together in our Propel Ohio conference to help those students engage and plan for the future and help this community. Just recently, my brother's keeper. We just did our statewide convention with my brother's keeper.
Senator, 30 seconds. Thank you very much.
Congressman Renacci, Senate Democrats last week forced a vote to support the rollback of a U.S. Department of Labor rule that allows for the sale of so-called junk health care plans that, among other things, could deny coverage to people with pre-existing conditions and would not cover prescription drugs and emergency room visits. Where do you stand on pre-existing conditions, emergency room coverage, and prescription coverage?
Well, health care is a big issue for me, and let's face it, when I travel the state, whether it's Mary, who I met in my travels, who said, Congressman, I can't afford my health care, and even though I struggle for the payments, I can't afford the deductibles. Or it's John and his family, as I traveled over in the Youngstown area, who said, Congressman, I can't afford this healthcare dilemma. I can't afford it anymore. And my kids, we have problems with deductible. I do believe we have to have health care for Ohioans, but we have to have affordable health care. And that affordable health care has to include coverage for pre-existing conditions. It also has to include allowing our children to stay on that policy till age 26. And it has to include making sure the caps are eliminated on illnesses. That's the type of health care that I have supported. But at the same time, we have to have health care that is affordable. We have to have health care that not only takes care of those in the low safety net, and I'm a big believer in that, Medicaid, we need to make sure they are covered. But we can do that better because we can't bankrupt our country trying to do it. And the rich are going to be okay. I'm more worried about those in the middle that are struggling every day to try and make not only ends meet, but able to pay for that health insurance. Our health insurance, since the Affordable Care Act, has gone up 132% in this state. It's unacceptable. And John, who I met the other day and was driving me, said to me, Congressman, I make less than $50,000 a year. I can't afford my health care, and you're penalizing me for it. I said, not me. 185,000 people in this state, 185,000 people in this state had to pay a penalty because of their health, not being able to afford their health insurance.
Senator Brown.
Start with this. Governor Kasich, a Republican, I'm a Democrat, worked together on the Affordable Care Act and then to expand Medicaid and ensure hundreds of thousands of Ohioans. In fact, 200,000 Ohioans right now are getting opioid treatment because they have insurance through the Affordable Care Act and Governor Kasich's and my expansion of Medicaid. But you know the biggest problem is, of course, the price of health care. Yet Congressman Renacci has voted more than 20 times to repeal the Affordable Care Act. And you know what that vote did? That vote also took away the consumer protections for pre-existing condition. That means because of his vote 20 times, because of the efforts of special interests in Washington, insurance companies can decide to deny care to people with pre-existing condition. There are 5 million Ohioans, including, I would assume, more than half the people in this room. There are 5 million Ohioans have a pre-existing condition now. Cancer, osteoporosis, high blood pressure, Parkinson's, a number of various ailments. 5 million people, and they would be, if Congressman Renacci has his way, they could lose their coverage. In addition, the most important driver of higher health care costs is the cost of prescription drugs. Yet this Congress, because frankly they're in the pocket of the drug industry. The White House looks like a retreat for pharmaceutical representatives, pharmaceutical CEOs. The fact is that this Congress will do nothing to go after the high price of drugs. You can't restrain the cost of health care until you go after drug prices and you protect people with pre-existing condition.
Congressman Renacci.
Sure. Well, it's interesting. The opioid addiction is terrible. And when I talk to people in this state and I hear their concerns, I hear the families of lost children. This opioid issue didn't just start last week or last month. It started over the last 20 plus years. And I noticed that Senator Brown talked about how we're working towards fixing it. The problem is he's been part of the problem with some of the policies that have caused it. The Affordable Care Act needs to be changed. It's unaffordable right now. And people like Senator Brown, who never lived in the real world and love Washington more than representing Ohio, need to understand people can't afford it.
We now turn to the audience for our next question. It goes to Senator Brown. Here's Greg Swart of Columbus.
Good evening. My question is, without tariffs on imported goods, how can American manufacturers compete on a level playing field with manufacturers in countries with a lower standard of living than ours?
Mr. Swart, thank you. And thank you for coming up from Columbus. You start with this. We have seen a generation now of companies shutting down production in my hometown of Mansfield or my wife's hometown of Ashtabula or Cleveland or Garfield Heights, shut down production, move overseas, and then build a plant there and collect a tax break for doing it. I have, my entire career, one of my first votes was in opposition to the North American Free Trade Agreement. I've taken on presidents of both parties in the trade policy that they have enacted because it clearly has hurt American workers and clearly hurt our state and clearly hurt American small businesses and large businesses alike. I've also worked with President Trump on this issue. My first correspondence with him, my first discussion with him was about Buy America in infrastructure. I've been in the middle of renegotiating the North American Free Trade Agreement. I support these tariffs if they're done right. And tariffs, understand, or a trade tool, a tool to get to a permanent policy later. But the fact is, while I fought against bad trade agreements, Congressman Renacci has supported every single trade agreement since he's been in Congress. Panama, and he called the South Korea, he supported the South Korea trade agreement even though President Trump said it was a horrible trade agreement. So you kind of can't have it both ways. I will always fight for workers. I respect the dignity of work. I understand how important industrial America is, manufacturing to our state.
Congressman Renacci.
Thank you. Well, look, China started the trade war, and we need to make sure we have a president who's going to work and try and fix that. And that's why I'm proud to see President Trump using tariffs to try and make that happen. But I don't see that as a long-term answer. In fact, I'm concerned about that. A tariff is a tax. A tariff means that consumers are going to pay more money. Ohioans are going to pay more money. So I've said all along, tariffs can be used on a short-term basis, but they can't be used on a long-term basis. And we need to make sure that we're continuing our agreements. The senator talked about agreements that, of course, I approve because Ohioans wanted it. Ohioans, the soybean producer, said to me, we need it. The manufacturer said we wanted to be able to open up new markets. If it was up to Senator Brown, he would sit back in Washington, do nothing, because he doesn't come out here to Ohio enough. He loves Washington too much and loves staying with Chuck Schumer and voting his direction, instead of coming out here and talking to the soybean operators or the producers, instead of talking to the manufacturers. I was just down at the Honda plant. They're concerned about these tariffs. I was just with the soybean producers. They're concerned with these tariffs. This is the problem. We can do it short term, but we can't do it long term. And that's a concern I have as I travel the state. People are concerned. They want to see this trade situation with China changed and fixed, and I do too. And I appreciate this president as one of the first presidents to do this, to work very hard to make sure he's negotiating. But tariffs will not be good long term for Ohioans and for Ohio consumers.
Thank you. Senator Brown, you have a 30-second.
Just to make it clear, I've heard Congressman Renacci maybe 4 times now say I'm never in Ohio. I come home every single weekend. Every single weekend. I go to Washington Monday, come back Thursday. You all know that, so I don't know where that argument's going. But more to the point, about a month and a half ago, in Youngstown, GM laid off a second shift of workers, 1,500 workers, building the Chevy Cruze, cars that many in my family, including some here tonight, have driven, as I buy my suits made in my neighborhood by union workers in Cleveland. And this plant laid off 1,500 workers the same day General Motors announced they were going to build a plant in Mexico. I called the President of the United States personally. I asked him to speak out against that. He didn't, but you know why? The reason he... I thought I had 9, okay.
Seconds. Thank you, Senator. We're going to go to our first video submission now, and Congressman Renacci, this is from you. It comes from Gina Wilt of Columbus.
Housing costs have been increasing more rapidly than incomes, especially for people working in low-wage jobs. What would your administration do to reduce the growing gap between stagnant wages and the cost of housing?
Well, again, I think housing is a big issue, but it's also wages are an issue, and that's why we need to have an economy that's growing. The economy today is an economy that's growing much faster than past economies. We had the last 10 years of lost time where our economy wasn't growing. Today, we have 4.3% growth. That's more wage earning abilities. We have the opportunities where wages are going up, unemployment's going down. Now the thing we need to do is turn that into making sure that people are trained for these jobs. That's why a couple years ago I said the biggest issue we have in Ohio is making sure people are trained and not just going to college. Training means having vote-tech education and opportunities for vote-tech. Those are the issues that I think we need to be talking about a lot more than some of the issues that Washington seems to want to talk about. They don't understand Ohio as well as being here and talking to the people who do understand Ohio. I think in the end, we got to continue this job growth. We got to continue to make sure Ohio is growing. We got to continue that Ohio is first, and our jobs that our skill set continues to allow people to have good paying jobs. Whether it's a skill set as a welder, whether it's a skill set as a bricklayer, these are opportunities in Ohio, which will also allow for individuals to make more money and create the opportunity to afford housing here in Ohio.
Senator Brown, 90 seconds.
It's hard to detect a lot of interest in higher wages for working class people when my opponent called the federal minimum wage ridiculous. Not ridiculously low, but ridiculous that it exists. Yesterday, Connie and I were at a neighborhood picnic, and I met a gentleman, I believe he lives in Parma. He works in Parma. His name's Chad. He's a diesel technician. And we talked about his past, his background. Maybe he's my age, more or less. I'm not sure how old he is. But what Chad said was Chad wanted to go straight to school because he wanted to learn that trade. And he knows diesel mechanics are very much in demand and can make decent wages. The problem is he had student loans he had to pay off. So whether you go to Lorain Community College or Sinclair, or whether you go to Ohio State or John Carroll, or whether you go into a trade school like that, student loans are a problem, and we've got to, my opponent literally voted against 25 million 25 million Americans. The banks didn't want him to vote for it. I suppose that's why. He voted the other side for 25 million Americans to have their student loan interest rates reduced because the banks didn't want them to be reduced, so he sided with the banks instead of with these 25 million students. Many people want to go to trade school, many want to go through career centers, many want to go to community college, many want to go to four-year schools. They should have that choice. We shouldn't put our thumb on the scale, but we should help them with their costs of going to school, period.
Congressman, 30 seconds.
Well, what's ridiculous is the federal government, as my opponent wants to say, has all the answers, and that's what I said about the minimum wage. The minimum wage is a state issue, and states should be looking at it. The federal government setting a minimum wage when we have different states and different costs is ridiculous. And by the way, when we talk about bailouts and listening to the banks, the senator supported the bailout. He voted to bail out the banks, and in 2010, he didn't vote when we wanted the bailouts to be stopped. He's the individual who is supporting those banks. By the way, $27 million in funding that he's received, and a lot of it is from the bank. So he should be very careful when he talks about who's receiving money.
Thank you, sir. Senator Brown, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change last week issued a report that warns if greenhouse gas emissions continue at the current rate, the atmosphere will warm up by as much as 2.7 degrees above pre-industrial levels by 2040, bringing worse food shortages, wildfires, and massive coastal flooding. The report said that the use of coal for electricity would have to drop from nearly 40% today to between 1% and 7% by 2050. What's your reaction to the report? What do you think could be done to avert the crisis?
My reaction to the report is it's solid. It makes sense. Congress and the White House have been derelict in their duty to address climate change, perhaps the greatest moral issue of our times because of the future of the health of our planet. We never should have pulled out of the Paris Accords on climate change. We know that we have seen weather patterns change dramatically. I've been around this state. Ohio, to create wealth in a state, you either grow it, you mine it, or you make it. And Ohio does all three. We're a good farm state, we're an energy state, and we're a manufacturing state. I've seen it all in Ohio. I've seen the wind turbines in western Ohio, in Paulding County. I've been to Toledo and many times been to First Solar. I know we mine coal in southeast Ohio. I want to do all of the above, but unfortunately, this Congress decides it's way more important to subsidize fossil fuel than it is to invest in wind, and to invest in geothermal, and to invest in solar. Toledo's one of the major solar manufacturers in the whole country, yet our state government and our federal government continue to be in the pockets of the fossil fuel industry, repealing renewable portfolio standards, all of those things that we as a state and we as a nation ought to be focused on. The report is mostly accurate. We need a Congress that's going to invest.
Thank you, Senator Brown. Congressman Renacci?
Well, thank you. And look, I support clean environment, I support clean water, I support clean air, but I also support an all of the above. And when it comes to all the above energy, we need to be thinking of those assets that are here in our state compared to other states. The problem with Senator Brown is he's more concerned about other states and Washington, D.C. than he is about this state. This state has natural assets in coal and in gas, and we should be looking at that. Those are jobs. You know, this senator many times wears a canary on his lapel, and he talks about the coal miners. My grandfather was a coal miner. My grandfather was a proud coal miner. And if my grandfather was alive today, you know what he would say? Senator Brown, you don't support me. You don't support me as a coal miner. You wanted to bankrupt one of the industries here in this state, which is important to this state. So yes, we do have to look at all of the above. And we have to make sure we're looking at our own resources as well and those that are beneficial. At the same time, all of the above, wind, solar, all of those are necessary. And I'm a believer that you can't just walk away from the coal, clean coal. You can't walk away from the natural gas, clean natural gas that's here and an asset in Ohio. So I'm a big believer that we need to continue to search for all the above, even nuclear. All of these should be looked at because we need to be competitive. And at the same time, you eliminate coal and natural gas like the senator would like to do, and energy costs from hardworking Americans are going to go up. Electric bills are going to go up. Let's be prudent. Let's do what's right. Let's quit worrying about voting with Washington, as my Senator colleague here does, and let's make sure we're voting with Ohioans.
Senator Brown, 30 seconds.
I do wear this canary in the birdcage to symbolize my support for mine workers, my support for all workers, my support for the dignity of work. The fact is, I led the charge a couple of years ago to restore the health care for retired mine workers. Senator Manchin in West Virginia and I led the charge to do that. I then, right now, am the co-chair with Senator Hatch, a very conservative Republican from Utah, to restore the pensions for 60,000 workers in Ohio. I support mine workers, they support me, but the important thing is I support them and will continue to.
Congressman Renacci, this question is for you. We live in a time of great division in this country. Civility does not exist anymore in some circles. In some cases, intelligent discussions on disagreements have been replaced by angry words and destructive actions on many sides. We see this coming from Washington and beyond, and many people in this country are concerned and scared. As a United States Senator, what would you do to help bring this nation together?
Well, absolutely, and that's one of the reasons when I went to Washington I was so frustrated. I got there, and my first hearing, I hear Republicans and Democrats arguing with each other and calling each other names. The civility, the issues were a problem. So what I did is I reached out in my first hearing and I spoke out and said, look, we can't continue to do this. I didn't come down here to fight with Democrats. I came down here to get something done. And I was proud that a colleague from the other side walked over to me, John Carney. He's now governor of Delaware, and said to me, I agree with you, Congressman Renacci, we need to work together. We started a bipartisan breakfast the following week that now has been going on for 8 years. That bipartisan breakfast includes 13 Republicans and 13 Democrats. We need to be able to work together. We need to be able to come together and make some decisions. And that's why, if you look at my record, I'm one of the 18th, I think it's 14% most bipartisan members of Congress, versus my opponent who's extremely on the other side. He's one of the 38% most partisan members. This is the problem. If you're going to just continue to vote 97% of the time with your party, 96% of the time with Chuck Schumer, Senator Brown loves Washington so much, and Chuck Schumer, that he votes 97% of the time with them. We need to be able to work together. I have a proven record of doing that in the Senate. I will start that exact same breakfast up, work across the aisle, get things accomplished. Over 15 bills made it to the House, Senate, and were passed out of that bipartisan group. I'm proud of that, and I'll continue to do that in the Senate.
Senator Brown.
Yeah, journalism school, doing a study of work in the Senate, found that I had more bills passed than all but 3 other members of the United States Senate, which obviously means they're bipartisan legislation. I talked about what I do in Ohio, bringing women together, bringing college presidents together, bringing people in the community together, students, doing all that. But let me talk for a moment about the work in Washington about bringing people together. I'm one of the major architects of the Farm Bill. I'm the only I'm the first Ohio senator in 50 years to be on the Agriculture Committee. I grew up milking Guernsey cows on our farm. Agriculture is such an important part of our state, but my point is the Farm Bill, it's a nutrition bill, it's a rural development bill, it's a conservation bill, it's a family farmer bill. We put together a coalition. We got 86 senators, more than ever in a Farm Bill, to vote for it, and we're working it through the House now. It's more of a challenge because the House of Representatives, you can see tonight, is so partisan. But let me ask Congressman Renacci a question about this. Perhaps the most divisive thing in our society now is what our government did to rip those children from their families in the border. Congressman Renacci was just with President Trump campaigning for him in Southwest Ohio, and I would hope Congressman Renacci would, and I'd ask him tonight, to use his connections, his friendship. He says the president got him in the race. He loves President Trump. Use his friendship to convince the president to pay attention to these children who are snatched from their families. Because, you know,
Senator, our time is up, and as you know, the rules are you can't ask questions to each other, but Senator, Congressman, you do have 30 seconds.
Yeah, I would hope Senator Brown would start paying attention to the questions and answer them. It was on the Farm Bill and farming. And again, Senator Brown supports waters of the United States, a terrible bill that hurts farmers. Senator Brown has also supported not eliminating the death tax, which hurts farmers. I may consider it a friend of the farmer. He might be talking about voting or supporting a farm bill, but he supports whatever Chuck Schumer and Washington tells him to support 97% of the time. He doesn't represent Ohio farmers. I do.
Thank you, sir. We now have another video question, Senator Brown. This one is to you. It comes from Kara Ayers of Mason.
1 in 5 Americans have a disability. A recent survey shows that 74% of likely voters are impacted by a disability. I'm interested in one specific policy that you would implement to improve the outcomes and opportunities for Ohioans with disabilities.
Senator?
Kara, thank you. And I will go back a little bit on that question. Many years ago, I was Secretary of State of Ohio. And one of the focuses of our foci of our work was to make sure that the ballot was open to everyone and that polling places were open to everyone. And I led the charge to make Ohio polling places voter accessible. Now, we've seen all over the country Republican efforts to suppress the vote and make it harder to vote. We see all that, but one of the things I did back then was I went to the McDonald's Corporation. It shows the kind of way I reach out to business, to labor, to civil rights groups, to everybody. I went to the McDonald's Corporation and asked them to print tray liners. They printed 1 million tray liners to put on plastic trays when people were going to McDonald's. And we had thousands of voter registration forms returned to the Board of Elections with ketchup stains and mustard stains, but they could still register to vote. But beyond that, that's sort of the past. What I want to do in the future, especially on housing, because this government is underfunding public housing. We're seeing far too many people are on a waiting list, low-income people, but people that are working hard, playing by the rules. They just don't have enough money to afford a decent place to live. And our federal government's turned their backs on Kara and Mason and people all over this country in providing housing. And if housing is life, if you don't have a clean, affordable place to live, everything else goes wrong. So our focus, particularly for the disabled, should be on what we do on housing.
Thank you, sir. Congressman?
Thank you. Look, our focus should be on the disabled and making sure that not only disabled, but Medicaid dollars are there for those in the safety net. I'm a big proponent of that, and I think we need to make sure we have that. We need to make sure that we're taking care of the elderly, the indigent, the handicapped, and the children. That's why I support Medicaid dollars, but I also support a Medicaid dollar being sent to the states so the states can take care of those that need it best. The states understand better the needs of what's going on in their state, not the federal government. Too often we have people in Washington who only worry about the next election. The biggest problem with career politicians like Senator Sherrod Brown is he worries about the next election. He shows up right before the next election and starts talking about bills. He forgets about the people here in Ohio. He loves Washington too much. What he needs to do is really come back here and start talking to those that are disabled, the elderly, the children. I've been going around this state. I haven't seen him one time as I've traveled the state talking to hospitals. I've been talking to the indigent, the elderly, and I know that they need to make sure that safety net is protected. I'm going to continue to do that, but at the same time, we have to make sure that we're more efficient. We have to make sure that we're giving those dollars to the states so they can be more efficient. This isn't about Washington, who, again, the senator in Washington, they just like to spend money. We need to make sure we're spending it properly and taking care of that safety net as well.
Senator Brown, you have 30 seconds for rebuttal.
Interesting that Congressman Renacci brought up Medicaid. My dad was a family doctor in Mansfield, Ohio. Every doctor understands the dictum, first do no harm. Yet Congressman Renacci he voted 20 times against really his own governor, Governor Kasich, in his expansion of Medicaid, voted 20 times to take away Medicaid for the disabled, for people in opioid treatment across the board. These are mostly working families making low income but getting health insurance because they couldn't afford it.
Thank you. We have another audience question from William Tarter of Broadview Heights. Congressman Renacci, you'll answer first.
Good evening. Student loans are a financial albatross to millions of young Ohioans who delay decisions such as getting married, buying a house, or having children because of their debts. If elected, would you consider a student loan forgiveness program to help attract, retain, and relieve the stress on Ohioans whose lives are affected by massive student loan debts?
Thank you, William, for your question. And one of the problems in Ohio is we're the #1 state for student debt because we have pushed all of our children and grandchildren into saying the only way you can be successful is to go to college. What we need to do is start looking at other opportunities and making sure we're looking at those VOTEC education opportunities. When it comes to student debt, I had student debt. I understand what it means, probably much different than my opponent, Sherrod Brown, who went to Yale and I believe was the son of a doctor. I was the son of a railroad worker. My mother was a nurse. We could barely make ends meet, but I knew what working hard and doing the right thing meant because my family gave me those values. And at the same time, I knew that sometimes student debt was out there and was needed to be able to get through school. But we have used student debt in so many of the wrong ways that we are leaving kids, the kids are coming out of college without a degree with student debt, and at the same time, there are people who are having so much student debt coming out of college, they can't afford to pay it back. Yes, I do think we need to look at the entire system. This is a system that's been built for years by career politicians like Sherrod Brown, who continue to just say, we got to have student loans, but here's what we got to do. We got to refine the system. We got to make sure that student loans are used properly. When I went to school, it was for books and the tuition. Today, student loans is growing in too big of a number, and it's because we have allowed the federal government to continue to say, use these loans for everything. Let's make sure we're looking at these student loans. Let's make sure that we're giving programs to forgive, and let's make sure we're moving in the right direction.
Senator Brown?
Thank you. And Mr. Charter's right. So many people with huge student debt, or they put off having a child, they put off marriage often, having a child, they sometimes don't buy a house as a result, and many times they don't start the business that they always dreamed of when they were younger to go out and start because of the debt. So what do? First thing we do is we try to lower the interest rate on these student loans. Congress tried to do that. These were private loans, these weren't federal loans. Congress tried to do that, but the banks, Wall Street came in and used its power with the majority party and was able to defeat this effort to lower the interest rates and therefore lower the monthly payments for 25 million. That would include probably, I don't know the numbers exactly, probably 1 million in Ohio, but 25 million nationally are paying higher interest rates because Congressman Renacci and his leadership in the House of Representatives so close to Wall Street. But the second thing is this state, maybe that is true, I don't know about Ohio's ranking in terms of student debt, but this state has continued to underinvest in our great state institutions. When I say great state institutions, I mean Cleveland State and Ohio State. I also mean Tri-C and Sinclair and LC and Lakeland and all of our great community colleges. And it means we underinvest in helping students that want to go a different route, to learn a trade, to be a welder, to be the diesel mechanic that I talked about earlier. So it's pretty clear. Okay.
Congressman Renacci, 30 seconds.
Well, thank you. You would think Senator Sherrod Brown was never in Washington. You would think that all this stuff is occurring, and even though he's been there for 25 years, it didn't happen under his watch. Look, he voted for the bailouts of the banks. He supported the bailout of the banks, and today he's one of the largest receivers of contributions, over $27 million from lobbyists and outside interest groups, including the banks. Here's a guy who seems to forget that he's under his watch, all of these problems have occurred. 25 years in Washington, and he thinks that he hasn't been there, and he acts like he hasn't been there.
Senator Brown, this question is for you. Over the summer, Immigration and Homeland Security agents raided 2 businesses in Ohio, arresting a total of more than 200 suspected illegal immigrants. Supporters of these raids said if they are illegal, they're breaking the law, and they should be deported. While opponents said that many of these workers had been law-abiding, tax-paying citizens for years, and taking them away from their families, including their children who were born in this country, was cruel and unnecessary. Senator Brown, do you support raids like the ones we saw this summer in Ohio?
That's not the right priority. I take a backseat to no one in border security in terms of hiring agents at the border, using technology, using helicopters, whatever, to keep our country safe. But I understand that our immigration system is broken. 13 million people here that are without documentation. We're not going to deport all 13 million of them. We shouldn't do that. But here's the difference: is this government goes after people. It doesn't go after the lawbreakers. I mean, our immigration enforcement, our deportations should be people who have broken the law, people who have committed theft, people who have committed physical crimes, people who have committed crimes generally. You don't prioritize by going after and deporting people who are working hard, who are paying their taxes, who are active in their church, who are raising their family, who are doing things in their community. If someone's been here 10 years working in their community, working full-time, producing for supporting their family, why would we deport them instead of going after people that have committed crimes? And I conclude with this, that the worst part of this immigration issue, the one we're addressing the worst, is these snatching children from their families at the border. Yet Congressman Renacci won't, I know I can't ask questions here, Mr. Mitchell and Ms. Fisher, but I guess I'd just like to pose to Mr. Renacci, what's he do in his conversations with President Trump? They're really close, they're personal friends. I assume he spends a lot of time at the White House with them. Ask him some questions about
Your time is up, Senator. Nice one there. Congressman Renacci, you have 90 seconds.
Well, one thing I think that the senator seems to forget about, and again, these problems didn't just occur. I keep saying this. He's been in the Senate for 25 years. His party actually had the House. It had control of the Senate with 60 seats, and it had the presidency. And yet they didn't fix immigration. They didn't find it to be that important back then. Here's the problem. When we're talking about immigration, we're talking about illegal immigration, the senator wants to say that's not illegal and it's not breaking law. There's a reason why it says illegal immigration. Now look, I believe we need to make sure that we're looking at our immigration system. It's broken. I traveled with Sandy. She sat next to me in an airplane one day, and she said to me, Congressman, when she found out I was a congressman, she goes, I'm working to become a legal immigrant. And please do not let people who have not gone through the process that I've gone through just be able to become legal immigrants. That is not fair. That is not fair for me. That's not fair for the country. Sandy was coming back to Ohio. Sandy's the one that I think we should be thinking about more, somebody who has worked through the system. That's why I support changing our system and making it better. I support modifying the old system, not the system that has been in there in place. And by the way, it's Congress's issue. This is something Congress should be doing. It's frustrating when I hear Senator Brown talk about the president. When it's Congress and he's been there for 25 years, he loves Washington and Chuck Schumer so much that he's forgotten about voting to fix the immigration system. And that's the issue that is so disheartening for me.
Senator Brown, 30 seconds.
Congressman Renacci works for the D.C. Travel and Tourism Bureau. Nonetheless, Congressman Renacci keeps talking about my time in Washington. He's hardly a newbie in this, number one. Number two, he's been in the majority party since the moment he came to Washington. The Republicans control the White House, the House of Representatives, the Senate, the United States Supreme Court, yet they can't seem to get anything done on immigration or on wages or on trade or on health care or on climate change. When I think about...
Senator, your time is up. Thank you.
Congress agreed on one thing recently, massive bipartisan legislation to address the growing opioid crisis, which now takes roughly 150 lives a day in the United States. Public health experts and first responders, however, say the measure lacks the steady, long-term funding needed to stop the spread of addiction. They say grant-style awards for pilot programs are a disincentive to organizations to make long-term investments. How do you respond to their concerns?
Well, my heart goes out to this opioid crisis. And again, this opioid crisis just didn't happen last week, last month. It's happened because of policies of Sherrod Brown in Washington over the last 25 years. Let's talk about some of those policies. When I talked to John, by the way, I started an opioid task force. I came back home. I took people who have actually been addicted and then have recovered. The other group was families who have lost their children. The third part of that group was healthcare facilities that are caring for those. And here's what I learned. When it was John, who was an addict, he told me the biggest issue we have are the policies that say you have to go to college. When he found out, he didn't want to go to college. Guidance counselors were telling him, you know why? The funding for high school education was pushing people to only go to college. And what he did, he turned to drugs. Or Michael, who was a successful businessman. What happened with Michael was he opened up that medicine cabinet and found drugs, extra opioid pills that his mother had. That was a terrible situation because what he did in some tough times is he started down that path. When you talk to these individuals, you find it's the policies that are concerning. We can't have policies, number one, that tell our children the only way you can be successful is to go to high school. We can't have policies in Washington that say you've got to prescribe to get rid of pain, 100% pain. These are some of the issues. But the problem is, Sherrod Brown loves Washington so much and Chuck Schumer that he continues to vote with those policies instead of trying to change those. That would be my goal. Let's take a look at all of these. And by the way, when it comes to healthcare facilities, they need more than 6 months, which is another issue.
Thank you. Senator Brown?
Ms. Fisher, as you know, 11 people in Ohio, if it's in the average, 11 people died yesterday from opioid overdose. 11 people died today. 11 people will die tomorrow. 11 people will die Tuesday. And it's so important. I appreciate Congressman Renacci's support of dealing with this awful, awful opioid public health crisis. I've worked on a number of bills with Senator Portman, including a bill that we attended together, the White House signing ceremony for, to keep fentanyl and carfentanil out of coming across our border. We've worked through the Postal Service to try to do it. We've worked with local police officers. One reason I think one of the reasons that the FOP endorsed me. We also need to do job training as we do opioid treatment. I'm working with a senator from West Virginia, a Republican, on that. We have taken Bridget's Path, this innovative one of 2 facilities in the entire country that pays special attention to babies born of addicted mothers. We got that into law so that can be replicated around the country. I know Columbus and Councilmember Brown is working on that issue also now, and I'm proud of that. But here's the thing. When you think about dealing with opioid addiction, first, do no harm, as I'd said earlier. I was at the Talbert House in Cincinnati. You know, one of the times I was with Chuck Schumer. I was at the Talbert House in Cincinnati with a man who told me, next he put his hand on his daughter's arm and he said, my daughter would be dead if it weren't for Medicaid. Congressman Renacci, you've voted 20 times to take away Medicaid.
Congressman Renacci, 30 seconds.
Well, not as he's spending too much time in Washington with Chuck Schumer, now he's spending time in Ohio with Chuck Schumer. Look, that's the biggest problem. That's the biggest issue. But here's what I said. Let's talk to the people. The facilities need more than 6 months to recover. And here's another thing that I found from my group. The parents who lost their child, you know who the first person that child ran into after they left that facility? Was the drug dealer. We need to be looking at all of these issues, not this Washington talk about money and this. Ohio's got plenty of money. As Senator said, we have Medicaid expansion.
Thank you.
And look
your
what's
time's
happening.
up. Senator Brown, many people on both sides of the aisle, though for different reasons, say that the recent confirmation hearings for Justice Brett Kavanaugh were a low point for the Senate and for political discourse. In retrospect, how should they have been handled differently?
I opposed. I met with Judge Kavanaugh. I researched his record. I made a decision to oppose him early, before Dr. Ford's testimony. I believe Dr. Ford. I think there's no question she was telling the truth. But I opposed that nomination because he and his record and the sitting Supreme Court have put their thumb on the justice scales to support large corporations that outsource jobs, over workers to support Wall Street, over consumers to support health insurance companies in their fight to get rid of the consumer protections for pre-existing condition. So I wish these were to be different. I don't know how the Senate does it differently. I think the fact that they rushed it through, they didn't allow tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of pages of documents from Judge Kavanaugh's time working for President Bush. They didn't allow the investigators to speak to a number of people that Dr. Ford asked them to, the FBI investigators. So I think this Senate system of confirmation needs to highlight more the history of these judges on how they have decided in the past as judges and explain those issues so the public could in fact see that Judge Kavanaugh was again going to make this corporatist Supreme Court even more supportive of corporations over workers and consumers.
Thank you. Congressman Renacci.
Well, thank you. And again, it was a low point for the Senate. It was hypocrisy at best. It was a Democratic Party that decided to tear down a poor man who actually gave a very compelling speech as well. Look, Dr. Ford gave a compelling speech, and so did the judge. In the end, they set a standard of conduct. The Democratic Party set a standard of conduct, and they said if you meet that standard of conduct, an unsubstantiated claim you cannot serve in Washington. Shame on them. They better start looking at their own people. I've said this all along. If you're going to set a standard of conduct for unsubstantiated claims, you better start setting a standard of conduct for substantiated claims. My opponent, Sherrod Brown, has volumes of records of substantiated claims of abuse, of spousal abuse, and the people of Ohio need to see that, look at it, and understand it. He will say that his ex-wife forgave him. God bless her. That is a forgiveness that God bless her for doing that. The problem is, I'm talking about all victims. I'm worried about all victims now of domestic abuse, not just one, every member of domestic abuse. That situation is a standard of conduct that Sherrod Brown now has violated, and he should not be sitting in a U.S. Senate seat any longer.
Senator Brown, you have 30 seconds.
Congressman Renacci, my former wife asked you to stop attacking our family. She called these charges and your attacks despicable. She is supporting me, and you should be ashamed of yourself.
Audience, again. Audience, we don't have, please, we don't have a lot of time left. And again, please hold your applause or displeasure, if you would, so we can get as much as we can here in the last few minutes. I'm going to do a bit of a lightning round here because we are running out of time. Senator Renacci, I'm going to begin with you. You have 45 seconds to answer this question. This comes from someone, a viewer who posed this question. How do you propose we protect schools from violence while also maintaining the rights of lawful gun ownership?
Well, thank you, and that is an issue. We do have lawful gun owners, and those lawful gun owners need to be protected. At the same time, we need to protect our schools. I was a father of 3. I understand what it is to send your child to school every day. But the answer isn't guns, which my opponent will say. The answer is we have to look at what the situation is occurring. We have to make sure our schools are better prepared, which I support. We also have to make sure we're looking at mental health. Mental health is an issue that the federal government and state government has just let go. I, at one point in time, had a facility that served mental health. There was a time where I was told, no more dollars, no more funding. We need to be able to look at mental health and change how we take care of those that need it most, that have that mental health disease.
Senator Brown, 45 seconds.
Yeah, when you answer a question like that and you get tens of thousands of dollars from the gun lobby, it's hard to do that dance in what you do. Of course it's mental health. Of course it's safer schools. Of course it's all that. But there's a provision in the gun law. If you go out to Cleveland Hopkins, if you're on the terrorist watch list and you go out to Cleveland Hopkins Airport, they won't let you on the plane. You go to Columbus, John Glenn International Airport. I love saying John Glenn Airport. They won't let you get on a plane, but you can buy an assault weapon if you're on the terrorist watch list. And the Congress refused to close that loophole because so many members of Congress are in the pocket of the gun lobby.
Thank you.
We have come to the point in this debate for closing remarks. By prior agreement, the candidates will follow the same order as opening remarks. And a reminder, candidates, you each have 90 seconds for your closing remarks. We begin with Senator Brown.
When you love your country, you fight for the people who make it work. When I get up every day, I'm ready for that fight for Ohio workers. Whether you punch a clock, whether you swipe a badge, whether you work for tips or for a salary, whether you're raising children or whether you're taking care of an aging parent. And people are angry because people have seen what this country's done, what this government's done. I talk to people all the time at the grocery store, picking up a prescription for Connie at the drugstore, at a plant gate or a school or an office building. And people are angry because they've seen they've seen years of trade and tax policy that shut down production in Dayton and Youngstown and move it overseas and then collect a tax break. They've seen a tax bill just a year ago jammed through Congress for the millionaires and the billionaires, and then Republican leaders say you pay for this tax cut in the hole in the budget by cutting Social Security and raising the eligibility age for Medicare. People believe this government, they think the system's rigged. They believe that they see the special interests in Washington having their loopholes and their lawyers and their lobbyists. I believe in the dignity of work. Much of too many in Washington don't. I believe in the dignity of work, which means if you play by the rules and you work hard, you should be able to get ahead. If you've worked all your life and you've contributed to the community, you ought to have a decent retirement. That's why I'm asking for your vote for re-election.
And now, Congresswoman Renacci, you have 90 seconds for your closing statement.
Well, thank you. And I want to thank the Debate Commission again for holding this. I want to thank the moderators for the questions. Look, in 1997, there was a congressman who was supporting an idea for term limits because Ohioans supported that idea. And Ohioans said, our biggest concern is we send people to Washington for 20 or 30 years, and they forget about the people they represent. That congressman was Sherrod Brown. He supported the idea of term limits back then, but today he's been there 25 years and wants to be there for 30. He doesn't support, as we've learned, he doesn't support the people of Ohio. He votes 96% of the time with Chuck Schumer, 94% of the time with Elizabeth Warren, 97% of the time with his party. He's the fourth most liberal senator in the entire Senate. That's not Ohio, and that's not Ohio values. Here's what I promise you. I will work every day to make sure that I make Ohio first. I want to be able to grow this economy. I want to be able to continue to make Ohio jobs prosper, just like they're doing now. 4.3% growth. We need somebody in the Senate that's not going to love going to Washington and being with Chuck Schumer so much, now I even learned in Ohio, that he's going to vote for the people in Ohio. Look, he tried to bankrupt the coal industry. He voted for sanctuary cities. He supports sanctuary cities. These are all things that Ohioans don't support. In November, I would ask for your vote, I would ask for your support, and I thank you for holding this event.
Congressman Jim Renacci, Senator Sherrod Brown, thank you both for participating tonight. You can applaud now if you'd like. You have been watching the Ohio U.S. Senate Debate 2018. Brought to you by the Ohio Debate Commission. On behalf of my colleague, Ann Fisher of WOSU, it's been a pleasure working with you. We'd like to thank our studio audience, who for the most part behaved tonight, and everyone who was listening this evening. I'm Russ Mitchell. Again, thanks for watching, and good night from Cleveland.